So hope everybody's doing well today. We are here, praise God, and we're ready to start with the home screen. We kind of left you at the home screen on Monday when we said, we talked to you about the lock screen. We explained, awake versus asleep, and also locked versus unlocked. We explained a little bit about Face ID and Touch ID and the passcode for getting into your phone. And then we mentioned the home screen as the jumping off place, right? Where everything else happens from there. All of your apps are on the home screen. Of course, Apple ships a number of them that they feel are of key importance to getting started and to using your device. And they even ship some that are more advanced, for productivity, and we'll touch on those too. So obviously we're going to, as I mentioned Monday, we're not going to be able to go through each individual app in tremendous detail, but we will at least touch on them and a little bit about what they do and so forth. And so they are all found as icons on the home screen. And those icons are those little pictures or symbols we described. And we said that really, in a lot of cases, the icons don't even have words. The ones on the home screen do, but they're not the central thing that folks who can see are looking at, right? They're looking at the color and the symbol. And Voiceover, of course, reads them and tells us what they are. They've been properly coded to do that. And you can swipe your finger all around the home screen, one finger swipe left and right, and you can find out what all of the apps are. And what we're going to do now is we are going to break the home screen down into several areas. Because if you look at the home screen, it's more than just your icons. There are more parts to the home screen than just that. And so we're going to divide it up into several major components so that you can understand how this home screen is laid out. Okay. And I'll be, demoing this as well. Now, obviously, if you are using an iPad, you can still get a lot out of this course, especially if you don't know anything about VoiceOver yet. But you're also going to want to take the iPad for All computing class that we have in the spring. That will start in March, and you'll be able to register for it probably in I would say February, maybe even a little bit sooner, but probably February. And so, in this class right now, we're focusing primarily on the iPhone. And we do that because we feel that for most people, that's going to be the point of entry, right? Most folks who are going to start out with a touchscreen device are probably going to get an iPhone first. Now, that's not a guarantee. There's nothing wrong with you if you get an iPad first, but it's just that's how, our experience has shown us that people do it. That's how we did it. Various home screen components. What are they? And the first one is the icons, the main part of the home screen, the bulk of the home screen. We will call it the icon area, okay? And it's just the every icon that you have. And I will, again, as I did on Monday, let you hear a little bit of that. 2:10 p.m. All right, I've got my iPad unlocked. I'm on the home screen, and you'll just notice that if I tap on something here, we can hear what it says.
Settings, TV, podcasts, App Store, books, news, stocks. Find My. Double tap to open.
I'll turn that up a little bit. I'm sorry there, guys. Do a few more now.
Stocks. Find My. Maps. Contacts. Voice memos. Notes. Reminders. Camera. Photos. Home. Clock. Calendar. Wednesday, October 6th. Double tap to open.
And you hear that they say double tap to open. If I don't move quickly enough, or not quickly enough, but if I let the VoiceOver cursor there long enough, what I actually hear is the hint, as it's called, which says double tap to open. And some of them
that's
also,
anywhere on the screen.
Anywhere on the screen. And some of them even give me little, like the calendar tells me the date.
Calendar, Wednesday, October 6th. Double tap to open.
The clock tells me the time.
clock, 2:12 p.m.
Okay.
Double tap to open.
Now, you might have you might hear something else on some of your icons. It might say something like one new item, or on the mail app, it might say, 3 unread messages or emails or whatever. That is what is known as the proper term for that is the badge, or the badge count. And the badge count on an app icon indicates that there may be some items that require your attention. Okay. These can be turned off or on in various ways, though that's not something we're going to teach today, but they can. But know that that's what that means. So when you hear that, there might be something in there that, that warrants your attention. Now, in some cases, it's not something that you need to, attend to right away. For example, Apple has a wonderful music creation and audio editing app called GarageBand. We teach it in the iPad course usually, and we might talk about it here a little bit, but it's pretty advanced, but it is accessible. And a lot of times that will get a badge because Apple releases new sounds for GarageBand, and they're free. It's entirely free. They could charge hundreds of dollars for that app, but they don't. And it's all the instruments are free, but they might introduce a new piano sound or a new guitar or drum kits, and so what they'll do is they'll put a badge on there to show you that, hey, there are new instruments available. The next time you go in there, you can download those for free if you want to. So sometimes it's not something that everyone would necessarily consider urgent, but other times you might have a new text message or iMessage. We'll explain the difference, but you might have a new message. So your messages app has one new item, and your email and your settings app sometimes will get a badge indicating there's something, either a software update or something else that might require your attention. So it's not a bad idea to check about, see if you can figure out what that is. And we'll later, as we progress through this course, you'll learn even today some ways to do that. Okay. So for right now, that is the main area of the home screen, the icons. Okay. App icons. We're going to talk about the second area. And that area is at the very, very bottom of the home screen. It's called the dock. The dock on an iPhone has 4 icons. And what you're going to learn in a moment is that the more apps you install on your iPhone, you're going to get more home screen pages, because you can't put an unlimited number of apps on one page, obviously. So eventually what happens is when that page is filled up to where visually it can't support any more apps, because the apps are arranged in a grid. And what do we mean by that? Rows and columns, right? As you move left to right, you might have a row with 5 columns, 5 different apps. And I can actually tell you on my iPhone. So yeah, there are 4 on the iPhone across. There are 4 apps across the screen, and I can literally move my, even though we've advised you that it's not the most productive way to navigate, I can literally drag my finger from one to the next, and I can hear that. You can't, but I can. And if I do it on my iPad, there's going to be more than 4 because it's a very large screen. But you can see that I can
find my stocks, news,
books. I can do that same thing. And when I get to a new row,
App Store, podcast.
Okay, right there was a little. Normally it's just one click, but this has a little extra sound. See if you can hear it. I don't know. I'll go backwards and it'll do the same thing, but in reverse.
App Store. Double tap to open. Podcast. App Store. Podcast.
I don't know if you can hear that, but trust me, it's there. So there's a little sound that indicates when you have moved to a different row, the next or previous row, depending on whether you're moving right or left. Now, each row, as I said, is going to have 4 items in it, 4 app icons in it, and then you'll move to the next row. So when you've filled up however many rows your device's home screen can hold, it's going to create another home screen, another page of apps. And we'll talk about how to move from one page to another in just a moment, because that's going to be the third component of our home screen. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the second component, which is the dock. That is the row of 4 app icons that is at the very bottom of the screen. And it happens to be the same on every home screen page. So it doesn't matter whether you have 1 page or 8 pages, your bottom row, the very bottom of the screen, the dock, is always going to have the same app icons no matter what page of the home screen you are on. And this allows you to have quick access to what you deem to be the 4 most important apps in your situation. You can put any 4 apps on there. Later on in the course, we'll talk about how to rearrange the home screen. But the default, if you just, and I think I can say this definitively, sometimes it changes from iOS to iOS version. But as of when I have 15 now, but I don't think I set up a new device with 15 at any point. So as of 14, if you set up a brand new device and you haven't moved anything around, the 4 icons that are going to appear on your dock from left to right are going to, on an iPhone, are going to be phone, Safari, messages, and music. So phone being obvious what it is. Safari is the web browser. Messages is your app for sending basically texting with people. And there are different kinds of text messages, but we'll get into that later. But that's your texting app, not your mail app. The mail messages are in the mail app. Email that's called mail. So this messages, that's your texting app. And then music, again, pretty self-explanatory. So those are the 4 that if you've not done anything to your device to customize it, those will be there, and they'll be there on every single page. Now on an iPad, excuse me, the dock is much more robust, much more stuff you can do with the dock. It's divided up into 2 sides, and we'll teach that in the iPad course. So I'm not going to do much demoing of my dock, except to show you that the icons on the bottom of the screen will stay the same on every page, and they're different on an iPad. I think there are 5 of them on the left.
2:20.
So let's go back to my iPad here. Let's listen to my dock.
Dock, Safari.
Okay, I wasn't on the first one. I swipe to the left.
Messages, 10 unread messages.
Okay, and then you have
Safari, music, mail, files.
And there's a files app. There's a 5th one on the iPad, but that doesn't matter. So if I change pages now, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. I'm on page 1 of 5. Let's go.
Page 3 of 5.
What's on the dock now?
Dock, messages, Safari, music.
See, exactly the same thing. So the dock, persistent across all home screen pages, stays the same. Okay. All right. That's component number 2 of the home screen. The first one was the app icons. The second one is the dock. The third one is the page selector. And again, this appears when there are at least 2 home screen pages. I told you that each page is arranged as a grid, columns and rows, and that when you've filled up one page, another page will automatically get created for you. Well, when that happens, you need a way to move from one page to another. And in a few moments, well, in a little bit, probably today, we're going to teach you a very, very cool scrolling gesture that will allow you to quickly change from app page to app page. But right now, you don't know that gesture yet if you're brand new to this. I mean, some of you do, but you don't. We'll just pretend. So there's another way to do it using what you already know, and that is just to touch the page selector. Now, where is this page selector? Well, there's a few ways to think about where the page selector is. You can think of it in reference to the dock. When you're swiping left and right, it's going to be one swipe to the left of the first icon on the dock. So if I go to the bottom here, my first icon was messages on the dock.
Music, Safari, messages.
And then if I swipe left, I'm going to land on that page selector.
Page 3 of 5, adjustable. Swipe up or down with one finger to adjust the value.
And see, the hint was really good there. Swipe up or down with one finger. So if I swipe down with one finger, it goes to the previous page. And if I swipe up with one finger, it goes to the next page. So again, gestures that you already know.
Page 4 of 5. Page 5 of 5.
That was just a one finger swipe up. Let's swipe down.
Page 4, page 3, page 2 of page 1 of 5.
Okay. Now, to try to give you
Notes.
some perspective here, I'm trying to do it myself, but it's to find out where that's located. If you touch on your iPhone, the only way I can really describe it without any sight at all or visual reference is to say it's probably I'd say it's closer to the right side of the screen than the left, probably 3/4 of the way across the screen, and maybe a finger length from the bottom, because the very bottom is your dock. And so you got to be just a little above that, and I can pretty much land right on it when I touch it, or I'll land on the icon that's just to the left of it, which is technically just above it. And so again, there's a few ways you can think about it. You can think about it in the perspective of swiping left from the dock. You'll find it. Swiping right from your other icons, and you'll find it. Okay, but it is the page selector. And again, for now, to change pages, you just touch that page selector or swipe over to it, and then use a one finger swipe up or down, or one finger flick up or down, whatever you want to call it. And on that subject, it gives me an opportunity to point out that you will hear sometimes the word flick, and you will also hear swipe. Now, truly, honestly, I know some people try to say they're not. These are the same thing, okay? They really are. They're interchangeable terms. I tend to say swipe. I've heard trainer Rita say flick. You know, it's the same. It is the same gesture. We're talking about that quick movement that we described on Monday. The voiceover hint, as you heard, says swipe up or down with one finger to adjust the value, to change pages. You know, that's what the hint said. But again, it really is the same thing. So don't worry about it if you hear one versus the other. You're not missing anything. It's the same. It's the same gesture. The thing about this stuff is it's very consistent. We're going to talk more about that today. And so the more you use it, not only does it become muscle memory, but it can also become even something that you can visualize in your mind, even if you don't have sight, because you can start to realize just from doing it, you know, you can start to get a feel for how big your screen is, and you can begin. I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for anybody else, but I know, not having, you know, I lost my sight at the age of 3, and I don't have a recollection of what it's like to see. So spatial concepts sometimes are rather evasive. They're rather tricky for me. But with something like this, you can still get a spatial idea of what your screen is like when you use it enough. That is the third component to the home screen. We have 2 more. There are 5 technically. Some of you may only have 4, but that's okay. So you have the dock, you have the app icon area, and you have the page selector so far. The fourth component of the home screen, the one that is at the very, very top of the screen. All right, we've talked about the very bottom. The very top of the screen. This is called the status bar. Now, the status bar contains various icons. They will change, and you may have different ones than I do to some extent, but some will be the same. So you're always going to have the time at the top left of the status bar. And you could theoretically get something even to the left of that, but normally the time is going to be the leftmost icon on the status bar. And if you touch it, it will read the time of day to you. Now, it is not possible to swipe to the status bar. Remember how I said if you touch the app icons and you keep swiping to the right, you're going to run into the page selector and then eventually into the dock. You cannot keep swiping left and expect to get to the status bar. The status bar must be reached by touch only. So you've got to lift up your hand and then take one finger and place it at the very top left of the screen, high as you can go without being off the screen. And you will find the time of day. Okay. You'll also then be able to swipe left and right, and you're going to stay within the status bar when you do, and you're going to find other relevant information icons. You might find the name of your Wi-Fi network and the number of bars, which indicates the signal strength, and it tells you how out of a possible how many as well, so that you have a perspective. So, for example, right now, it says the name of my network, and then it says 3 of 3 Wi-Fi bars, and that indicates to me that it's the best it can possibly be. If it only said 3 bars, I wouldn't know how good that really is, because I wouldn't know what the possible total is. So it's telling me 3 of 3. Now, the other networking icons you may see up there are your cellular strength, also indicated as a number of bars, and once again it will tell you the possible total. And then it just depends. Usually on most of the modern devices, when they are unlocked and on the home screen, you won't hear the name of the carrier. That will appear when the phone is locked, but other things kind of take up that space. But if you don't have, if you're not currently connected to Wi-Fi, you may hear the type of cellular data that you have. For example, 5G, LTE, and there are others. Okay, so those are that's typically up there as well. Now, you're also at the very top right going to have an icon that reads the battery percentage to you. And it will just, if I touch it right now, it says 81% battery power, not charging, status bar item. Okay. So that is a very good explanation of, what I have, battery power remaining 81%. It's not charging, just in case I thought that it was. Maybe I have a bad cable, or, came unplugged or something, and I need to know that. So it's indicating to me not charging, which that's what I expect right now. All right. So you have that at the top right. So the time is at the top left. The battery is at the top right. And sometimes, as I said, something will jump in there to the left of the time or to the right of the battery that isn't normally there, but we'll explain what some of that is as we progress. But basically, those are typically, under most circumstances, the most leftmost and the rightmost icons on the status bar. And then in between, you have these signal strengths. You also have, for example, right now, I have a thing. Yeah, I have a thing that says region tracking on. And that is indicating to me that an app or a service might possibly be aware of my current location. Now, what you need to understand about that is it's not like you have Apple engineers or anybody really, who is sitting there watching my location. They cannot see me. They're not watching my movement. They're not, doing anything like that. It simply means that there might be an app that is aware of my location, either precise or possibly just a general broad spectrum location. And in this case, quite honestly, it's probably the WebEx app, okay? Because the WebEx app, uses location when you join meetings to determine appropriate call-in phone numbers and stuff, but it could be anything. I mean, I've got a lot of apps. It's not something to be concerned about. You're almost always going to see it. Rarely is there a time when you won't see an icon like that, unless you've disabled everything. Okay, but to get the best features and functionality, you don't want to disable everything. You have to. That's a discussion for another day. But I'm just pointing that out. Okay, like for example, I have the weather always aware of my location, the weather app, because that's the only way I would get local to me weather forecast. How am I going to know if it's raining while I'm, somewhere else, and unless it knows that I'm in that somewhere else at that moment? So it's always monitoring. So that icon is, for most people, is going to be pretty common, and it'll either say location tracking or region tracking on. And again, it's precise versus whatever. So that icon is there. You will see icons if your microphone or your camera is in use. There are all sorts of possible icons that you can have up there, but we've talked about the most common ones. Again, you swipe left and right to read these, and they must be found by touch. Remember, you've got to get to the status bar by lifting your finger and touching the very top of the phone. When you're done with the status bar, you have to lift your finger and touch somewhere else. All right. That's the only way to get out of that as well. Now, that was our fourth area of the home screen. We had the app icons. We had the dock. The fifth and final area of a home screen, which you may or may not have, it's personal preference, is the widgets area. And the reality of it is that as of iOS 15, there's no fixed point where the widgets area must be. It can be any place that you decide to put a widget. And some folks are, they find this a challenge if they've not gotten used to it and they haven't been taught how to use it. But widgets can actually be really wonderful. I love widgets on the home screen, because what widgets have done is they've taken something that's otherwise static, okay? In other words, unchanging, and they've made it dynamic. They've added a live element to the home screen. Now, let me give you an example as to what in the world I mean. Well, you have a weather app on your home screen, and you can open that weather app by double tapping on it for voiceover, tapping for non-voiceover users, and you can go into the weather app. And it's really not a big deal, double tapping an app. Wow, how inconvenient, right? It's not. I mean, it's, we do it every day. Millions of times we double tap on our apps, and that's fine. But what if we could also have a live view of the weather right on the home screen? Might there ever be a time when just looking, if we can see, or just, tapping or swiping over to it would instantly give us, the current conditions? And that way we'd know, is there rain coming? Is there snow coming? Is it really, really hot out? Is it cold? Whatever. We would know that information without even having to go into an app. And that's what widgets do. They are an extension of an app, essentially. Might even say a little applet. I don't know that that's the correct term, but it is able to be placed directly on the home screen, right alongside your other apps. And there is also a page of widgets that you can swipe to that has only widgets. It's before page one of your apps. But the greatest thing, in my opinion, to be able to do with these widgets is to pin them to the home screen so that they are there with your other apps. And again, there's no specific place anymore where they have to be. It used to be that the only widgets you could have on certain devices were at the very top left of the screen, and then you only had your apps. Well, now a widget can live anywhere on the home screen. To my knowledge. Oh, go ahead, Rita.
I was just going to say, right where you are, right here. The widgets, okay, he described, you've got your status bar, you've got your grid of apps, you've got your page selector, and you've got your dock on the home page. Okay, and then visually, the real estate where these widgets would go would be in the grid of apps location. You can't put widgets on the dock, right?
Right. Actually, that's what I was just about to say. I don't think you can. I think that they have to be in the grid of apps. That's right.
Okay. So imagine you've got this grid, and for the typical iDevice, say there's 4 apps across and 6 apps down. Okay. So you've got row 1, say would be your whatever contacts app or whatever. Row 1 position 1, row 1 position 2 might be your messages app, across. Okay, and then so think of this like as some blind people have used graph paper before. So you've got these squares, and when you add a widget, you could make the widget a certain size. There's small, medium, and large. All right.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And And then what happens is the say you added a weather widget, and say you've got it in the small size, and say you wanted to put it in the upper left hand corner right below the status bar. So what's going to happen is the grid of apps is going to move over. So in your upper left hand corner will no longer be, say, your contacts app in row 1, position 1. What will happen is this widget will take up row 1, row 2, positions 1 and 2, like a little square. So it's going to take up maybe 2 slots or 4 slots or 6 slots, depending on what size you make of this widget. And so what's going to happen is it's going to move your other grid of apps over, okay, to accommodate the real estate that this widget is now taking up. So your home screen is no longer going to be the 4 apps across, 6 apps down. It's going to have these widgets, and you can put these widgets anywhere now. It used to be only in the upper left-hand corner. Now they can go anywhere. And so how your home page looks is going to be different because it's so customizable. So just be aware of that. Okay, now I'm there. That's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exactly right. And, later in the course, not today, but later on in the course, we will talk about and we will teach you how to create folders where you can put multiple apps in one folder. And we'll even talk about how to create stacks of widgets, meaning you can put widgets on top of each other that you can easily rotate through. And my personal favorite widget is the Smart Stack, which is where I can stack widgets on top of each other, and then they are automatically rotated through depending on what's going on. So, for example, if my watch battery or my phone battery gets low, all of a sudden it's going to display the battery widget to remind me that I have a low battery. If I am traveling, or if it knows I have an upcoming appointment that's not at home, it might display the maps widget so I can get directions. It may display a calendar. And then in between things, it'll display it'll display the weather, sometimes photos I can get quick access to. It'll think, oh, maybe you'd like to see this photo, or, this TV show or something, so there's a whole bunch of widgets that I have, in probably 7 or 8 widgets in this stack, and it automatically rotates through them. I can also rotate through them manually, but, it's because it's the Smart Stack specifically, it will do that on its own. So, we'll teach you how to do that stuff later, and how to add and remove widgets from your home screen. But right now, what we just wanted to do is to orient you. And in fairness, that's probably not really a separate component to the home screen. I said that there were 5, and technically that's just another thing you can put with your apps. But, breaking it down that way is I think helpful to visualize what the differences are. So one more time, the home screen, the 5 areas we've said then are the app icons, the dock, the page selector, the status bar, and the widgets. So that is your home screen in a nutshell.
And just one more point here. I think a lot of people get confused with muting VoiceOver and or turning VoiceOver off. When you mute VoiceOver, the gesture for that is a 3-finger double tap on the screen. And what will happen is it will mute VoiceOver, but VoiceOver is still running. So your gestures that you use with VoiceOver will still work, even though VoiceOver isn't talking. And so some people confuse that with, well, I turned off VoiceOver with a 3-finger double tap, and you didn't. You muted.
Even though we haven't taught the 3-finger gestures yet, some of you know that, but that was a reminder about the explanation of the difference between turning VoiceOver off and then simply muting. So, very important. Can you reposition items in the status bar? And this gentleman saying time is in the middle. It probably is. No, you can't reposition items. They can reposition themselves in certain cases. As I said, something may jump into the left or to the right. And also, it does depend on the phone model. So the description that I'm giving is based on the latest devices, but some of the older iPhones may have things in a different position. We're going to continue. And we're going to talk about some other areas that are accessible from the home screen. We're also going to talk about a few more. We're going to introduce you to a few more voiceover gestures today. And I want to start out with a gesture that is pretty important. One that it may not seem like this would be logically the next one to introduce because it's a 3-finger gesture and we've only done 1 finger, but there is a 3-finger gesture that I think is very useful. And it's the 3-finger swipe to scroll gesture. You can swipe with 3 fingers in any direction, up, down, left, or right, just depending on what you are doing. And earlier I said to you that there's a quicker way to get from page to page on the home screen, quicker than having to go to the page selector. And this is it. Anytime you're on the grid of apps, that main app icon area, you can simply do a 3-finger swipe to the left to go to the next page, or a 3-finger swipe to the right from left to right to go back to the previous page. If you are, that also will help you to understand when to use left and right with 3 fingers and when to use up and down, what Lynn just said. If you're going from page to page, separate page to separate page, like on the home screen, it's left and right. 3-finger swipe to the left, 3-finger swipe to the right. But if you're scrolling within the same page, and this would be like on a website or a document, which is, continuous, you are going to use the 3-finger swipe up and down to move. And again, what this does is it just gives you a quicker way to move than just swiping left and right with 1 finger. If you have many pages, we'll open the settings app maybe yet today if time permits, and we'll try this and you'll see what I mean, how settings is a great place to test it, because a lot of people have many settings options, and this way they can easily scroll through that long list more quickly. So I wanted to cover that 3-finger swipe gesture. One of the things I'll point out here is that we probably won't necessarily introduce every gesture, but rather we'll let you go to that touch gestures place under the voiceover commands and settings and explore some of them on your own. But there's a couple I wanted to introduce right now, and that's one of them. Another one that I wanted to introduce right now is the, it's funny. There is a term called magic tap. And magic tap is one of those gestures that's just useful to have in your tool belt. I am convinced that it was the community of users, not Apple, who named this the magic tap. But a lot of times, fiction ends up being truer than reality, right? You heard the story, maybe you haven't, but I am very much into space travel. You've heard the story of Apollo 13, that the spaceship that was supposed to land on the moon, and then there was an oxygen tank explosion. There's a big movie made about it in the 90s, Tom Hanks and Ed Harris and so forth. Anyway, one of the guys in there, the flight director, was credited as saying failure is not an option. He never actually used that phrase in real life. He said things that were indicative of that, that implied that, but he never used the phrase failure is not an option. That was written strictly for the movie. Well, guess what? About 10 or 15 years later, the actual man, the flight director himself, the real guy, wrote a book about his experiences. Guess what he titled his book? failure is not an option. You see, sometimes what we think and what we dream up ends up being so good that it ought to be real. I am convinced that's what happened with the Magic Tap. Apple never used the term Magic Tap until about iOS 13. All of a sudden, you see them using the term, and I'm convinced it's because everybody else used it. And it is a good term, because this Magic Tap, this 2-finger double tap, can do so many things depending on what situation you are in. In a lot of cases, it will pause and play music. If you already have music playing, you can 2-finger double tap and it'll pause for you. Same thing with video. If you are in the Voice Memos app, you can use it to pause and resume a voice memo.
I know I'm stating the obvious, but this is when you have VoiceOver turned on.
This is only for VoiceOver. Yes, that's correct. Good point. When you're in an edit field, you can use the Magic Tap as long as the focus is in the right place. We'll learn that later. You can use the Magic Tap to start and stop dictation. When a phone call comes in, you can use the Magic Tap to answer the phone call. You can use the Magic Tap to hang up, to end the call. So there are numerous scenarios where this Magic Tap is very useful. And I just wanted to teach it to you for those that didn't know it. It's a 2-finger double tap, and its official name now is indeed the Magic Tap. And that's the 2-finger double tap. That gives you a little idea of a couple more gestures. And there's one other thing I want to talk about with a couple more gestures. Then we're going to take a 2 or 3 minute break and look at the Q&A again while we do. And then we're going to teach the rotor second half today. But I want to just, one other thing first. I want to talk very quickly about the control center and the notification center, what they are and how to access them. As you know, last week we introduced you to a gesture which involved placing your finger in a particular place and then sliding it. In this case, it was placing your finger at the very bottom edge of the screen, below the dock, as you now know, and you hear a little blip sound, and then you swipe up and you hear a second blip sound, and that takes you home. Now, there are a few other gestures that use that same idea, placing a finger either at the bottom or the top of the screen, and then sliding or swiping, but you're either going to swipe from the bottom to the top or to the top, from the top to the bottom, just depending on where you place your finger. And so I'd like to teach you what those are. And in conjunction with that, we'll talk about control center and notifications. So the second of those gestures that I want to teach you is also bottom to top. You're going to place one finger at the bottom of the screen, but this time you're not going to stop when you hear the second blip sound. So you're still going to place a finger at the bottom and slide up to the second blip, but you're not going to stop. You're going to keep swiping up even farther until you hear the third blip sound, and it's an even higher pitch sound. And this is what we call the app switcher. Now you can also access, if you have a home button, you can access the app switcher by double pressing that home button. The app switcher shows you all of the apps that are running on your device or that have been recently used. You can easily double tap on any one of them to switch to it immediately. You can 1-finger swipe left and right through the apps in the app switcher. And if you want to get out of the app switcher, you just do your go home gesture or press the home button. Now, while we're talking about the app switcher, we have to answer the very important question and finally solve the debate once and for all. Is it necessary for me to close apps from the app switcher, to force quit those apps in order to keep my phone running well? And the answer is absolutely not. That was a myth that got started somewhere, and a lot of people ran with it. And what they would say is things like this: well, the more apps you have in your app switcher, that means that there's more apps running, it's using battery power, and it's degrading performance. What they didn't understand was that Apple has designed iOS in such a way. Remember, Apple makes the whole process. They control the entire experience. They have the silicon, the processor, everything. They can manage memory better than any other computer or technology company because they control the whole experience. And they have designed iOS and really now Mac OS too, because of M1, to take full advantage of all of its resources and to automatically manage the apps. And so even if an app is in the app switcher, it's not necessarily in active memory. I don't want to get into real details because A, many of you are brand new and it would be overwhelming. And B, I don't even know all of the details. A lot of it is above my pay grade, okay? But I do know enough to know that Apple iOS manages the memory itself. It puts apps in a suspended state so they are not taking up memory. And therefore, there is absolutely no need and also no benefit to you closing apps from the app switcher. You are actually doing yourself a disservice when you force quit the apps, because then they have to reload from the beginning. And, a very simple analogy is if I have a cookie jar on the counter and all I got to do is put a lid on it, but all my, cookies are right there, versus if I put them away in a cabinet every time, now I have to go into that cabinet and I got to get them out again. So every time you force quit that app, you are reloading everything. That's harder on performance and battery than just leaving it in its suspended state. If the app is not behaving properly, it's frozen or it just isn't working right, as they say in this generation, it's glitching, there's something wrong with it, that it's not doing what it should be, or it's doing something it shouldn't be, then you want to force quit the app from the app switcher. And that is one of the first and one of the best troubleshooting steps, and 9 times out of 10 it will solve the problem. And so in order to force close an app, you can VoiceOver will tell you to 3-finger swipe up on it. When you go into the app switcher, it will actually say swipe up with 3 fingers to close the app, and that's a force quit. So if you're having problems with the app, there are also cases where I've heard some people do force quit their GPS apps because they feel that maybe it's using GPS in the background, and so it's using more battery power in that case. And that, I have mixed feelings on that, but I can't say that that's completely wrong. I don't think it's true for an extended period of time, because once the app goes into a suspended state, it's not going to keep using GPS in the background. But until it does, I could see that being true, at least for a while. So, there are times when that makes sense, but going through your app switcher and closing every app is just completely unnecessary. Simple as that. So we wanted to cover that while we were talking about the app switcher, but that was a bit of a rabbit trail, but I think an important one. So again, to reiterate what we originally, your second swipe gesture, where you place a finger at the bottom, swipe up to the second blip, that would be the home screen. Keep going to the third blip and lift your finger. That is the app switcher. And now I'd like to tell you 2 more, and these are from the top of the screen now. So instead of placing 1 finger at the bottom, you're going to place 1 finger at the very, very top of the screen. And again, you're going to hear a little blip. Now, I recommend like the top left corner for VoiceOver users. Could be the top right corner also. And you place 1 finger up there, you hear the blip. If you swipe down to the second blip, it's Control Center. And we will define what that is in just a moment. And if you keep swiping farther to the third blip, it's Notification Center. And we will also define what that is in a second. Now, before we do, some of you are familiar with a different way to get into Control Center and notifications. And in fact, Apple still has the VoiceOver hint in the status bar. If you touch the status bar, it will say to you, swipe up with 3 fingers to open Control Center, swipe down with 3 fingers to get to Notification Center. I forget exactly the verbiage, but that's what it says. And that is true. Those are still acceptable gestures also. But Apple has kind of instructed us in the resources that, the Apple teachers get and so forth. they've kind of said they really want us to teach that new gesture as the way to do it. That is how they present it. And so it really is important that you know the new gestures. I can't speak for Apple. I don't know whether they're going to, eventually do away with the other ones or not. Some people still prefer the other ones because they're just a little more comfortable with them. You know that if you touch that status bar, once you've got focus on it, you can now anywhere on the screen swipe up with 3 fingers for Control Center or down with 3 fingers for Notification Center. But I actually find the new gestures to, just be more consistent with what is going on. And if you are comfortable with them and you get used to doing them properly, they are actually much quicker than the other one because you don't have to first touch the status bar and then, swipe up as a separate gesture or swipe, you just touch it's just like going home, except in the opposite direction. Let's talk about what Control Center and Notification Center are and what they do. Control Center, which again is the 1 finger, place at the top and swipe down to the second blip, is the place that gives you quick access to many hardware controls and even some common software controls. You can customize what is in the Control Center to an extent. There are some things that will always be there, but you can customize some of the other stuff that's there. And for example, by default, you're going to have your airplane mode icon in Control Center, which is a quick way to, disable all the wireless radios on your device. You're going to have icons for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth that you can toggle your connection to the Wi-Fi network or to your Bluetooth devices. You're going to have media playback controls for the last thing that played, and it will show you what the thing is that was playing or that is playing, and you can pause and go to the next or free track. And you can change other things like the playback destination if you have, an Apple TV or a HomePod or AirPods or, Bluetooth car audio or something. You can switch those from there. You're going to have a flashlight in the Control Center. Many people have things like a remote for their Apple TV in there, or there's some really cool, like there's a music recognition control. You can put your the focus, which used to be do not disturb, is in. There's a number of controls in the Control Center, and these can simply be double tapped to toggle them where they're toggles, or to access additional information. And there's also sometimes contextual options that are specific. For example, there's a Wi-Fi icon in the Control Center. Now, if I just double tap that Wi-Fi icon, it's going to disconnect me from all nearby Wi-Fi networks temporarily. And if I double tap it again, it's going to reconnect me, okay? But there are other Wi-Fi options besides just that. So how do I get to those options? And that requires a context menu. How do I get to a context menu? Well, that's going to be a new gesture that you're going to learn now, the official name of which is the long press, okay? The long press gesture. Now, for sighted users, long press literally just means tap and hold. Long press, all right? Very, very simple. For voiceover users, we have to double tap and hold, okay? Very important gesture, the long press. And again, it's just a double tap and hold. And you'll hear these 3 rising tones when you do it. And then the context menu will appear. And with voiceover, you'll even get a little, on the iPhone, you'll get a little, like a little haptic touch on a little prompt, like a little vibration when the context menu opens. So again, you double tap, but you don't let go. You keep holding. And that is the long press gesture. So from now on, you know that when I say long press something, that means double tap and hold. You'll hear the 3 rising tones. And then the menu will appear and you can let go. That is very useful for contextual options and menus and other things of that nature. And in the control center, that's a very important gesture to know, because almost everything has long press options in it. So it's typically a way to further customize what it is that you're doing. I'll give you a second example, which isn't going to mean much to some of you if you're brand new, but for those who are, who have been doing this a while, this will mean a lot. And for the rest of you, we'll get there. If you double tap on the focus icon in the control center, it quickly turns do not disturb on or off. But what if you want one of your other focus modes, the sleep mode or the personal or the work or something? Well, that's the long press. You double tap and hold, and it will bring up the list of focus modes that you have, and you just then choose the one you want. Or you can even create a new focus right there on the fly from control center. But you have to long press, double tap and hold to bring that context menu up to be able to do that. So that's a very important gesture. We want you to learn it. And it's just called long press, double tap and hold. So that is control center. Control center is very useful and is the place where a lot of hardware controls, quick access and even some software things, are available. Again, you can customize control center from your settings. Those who are new to this will learn about settings later, but you can customize the control center. And again, just to remind you, you get to it with a one finger touch at the very, very top corner. And when you hear the little blip sound, you then just swipe down with one finger to the second blip sound. If you don't have VoiceOver on, if you're not primarily a VoiceOver user, it's still like a swipe down from the top. And they say a swipe down from the top right corner without VoiceOver. So I think that gives you a little bit of an idea what control center is. I have not gone in depth with each, control, and that is intentional because, that would take a lot of time to do. What I'd rather you do is I'd rather you explore it for yourself. And we will, continue to provide additional information. These things tend to come full circle, and we talk about them for other reasons. Okay, but now if we say something is in control center, how to get there and what that is. The other place that we talked about was notification center, and if you'll remember, that was a placing of one finger at the top. You hear a blip sound, and then you swipe down past the second blip, even farther to the third blip sound. And it opens your notification center. Is it displays all of the notifications that you have received and not taken action on. Okay, we're going to learn about notifications, and I don't know if we'll do it today because I don't know. We'll see. I kind of want to make sure we cover the rotor. And so we may put off notifications till Monday, but we'll see what time permits. But it is possible to take action on notifications right away when they come in. But what if you're not there? What if you're busy and you don't have your phone right by your hand at the moment, or you choose to just wait? You're having dinner with the family and you don't, want to mess with your phone while you're doing that. So you just let it go, So in that case, all of your notifications that you received are able to be accessed from this notification center. And you'll see as we teach you, one of the most important things I can tell you about notifications, whether they're in notification center, whether they're on the lock screen, whether they're on the home screen as you're using your device, they are always actionable with a long press. Okay, actionable meaning we can take action on them. We don't just have to dismiss them and do nothing. We can actually do stuff. For example, if I get a reminder notification that pops up and tells me water the plants, I can tell my phone right then and there to mark that as complete. I've already done it. Or I can tell it to remind me in an hour or to remind me tomorrow. All of those options are context options. So again, we just learned the long press gesture. We know it's a double tap and hold. If you long press on a notification, you will get these context options and you will be able to take quick actions on the notification. So very, very useful to know. That's why we taught this in the sequence that we did, because it all sort of works together. In the time that we have remaining today, I do want to talk about the rotor, and then next week we'll pick up on the we'll do more about notifications. We're going to get into some apps next week, and we're going to talk about something very important next week called predictable patterns in apps. It's so important to understand, as Rita was already starting to explain, that this stuff is consistent. It's consistent across apps. It's consistent across devices. The kinds of things that you will run into, that you will experience, that you benefit from on an iPhone are true on an iPad, are true on a Mac, are true on the Apple Watch, are true on the Apple TV. All of these kinds of things you will find, the terminology, the way that you navigate. This is not one of those scenarios where you need a whole separate set of keyboard commands or gestures to navigate different apps. All of this applies everywhere. And so we're going to, continue building on that. All right. So we have so far talked about swiping from left to right or right to left. Swipe left to go backwards, swipe right to go forwards. And we've said that that's how all navigation works on iOS. You move from element to element by swiping left and right. So what do you get if you swipe up or down? And to tell you all about that, we need to introduce you to the rotor. The rotor, R-O-T-O-R, the rotor is a virtual on-screen control. Okay, simple as that. It's a virtual on-screen control. It is context aware and it's dynamic. So what do those $2 million terms mean? Context aware means that it knows what you are doing. It knows whether you're browsing a website, whether you're in a text edit field, whether you are on a value adjuster like that page selector that we had. Remember, page 1, and then it said swipe up or down to change the value, to adjust the value. It knows what kind of screen element you are on. And dynamic means it changes depending on the context. So
Matt, I just want to add something. Visually, it looks like a dial.
That's correct. That's correct.
It's like turning a dial.
And that's how we're going to control it. So it's a virtual control, but you change or you turn the rotor to go through different rotor items. Okay. Now you can customize the rotor to some extent. You can choose which items appear in the rotor and which ones do not. But there are some things that you cannot customize. There are some things that just appear when they are needed, and then they go away when they're not. Okay. So to move from rotor item to rotor item, you're going to put 2 fingers on the screen and you're going to twist like you're turning a knob, like Lynn said, like you're turning a dial. And it's only a voiceover command. Sighted users don't have a rotor, okay? It's typically because they don't need it. There are other ways of doing things, but those things require some visual reference. So with voiceover, you have the rotor. But when you have voiceover on, if you place 2 fingers on the screen and rotate them either clockwise or counterclockwise, to the right to go to the next item, to the left to go to the previous item, then you are turning the rotor, okay? And when you do that, as Lynn said, it will appear on the screen as a dial. Now, after a few seconds, it will go away. But the 1 finger swipe up and down gesture will always, even when the rotor's not on the screen, will always control whatever rotor item you are on. Now, I know that sounds a little bit vague, so let me restate it and then let me explain it in with some examples that'll help it to make sense. So let me, first of all, just restate what I've said already in case you're taking notes or you just want to hear it again. The rotor is a virtual on-screen control. It's context aware, meaning it knows what kind of element you're on. And it's dynamic, meaning it changes when it needs to. Items appear in the rotor when they're needed and go away when they're not. Some of the items in the rotor are customizable, so you can go into settings and add things to the rotor that you want in it or take things away. And as we said, you activate it by putting 2 fingers on the screen and rotating them in either direction like you are turning a dial or a knob. Now, for those who want a little further clarification on that, I prefer to use the pointer and the middle finger on my right hand. I find that for me, that works reliably. I have used some other fingers sometimes, and I can usually do that too, but I find I have the best results with the index finger and the middle finger while I'm holding the phone in the other hand. Some folks like to use the thumb and another finger. You can even use 2 hands. You could put, let's say, your index fingers on the screen, and you could move one finger up while moving the other finger down. And that's going to simulate that same turning motion. Yep.
Right. You have to push and twist.
You could even turn the phone technically, and it should still simulate, as long as you've got 2 fingers placed on the screen, it should still simulate that same gesture. And another thing I'll point out while we're talking about, tips for turning the rotor, I don't honestly know, this could be just entirely in my mind, but for me, it is better when I have my left hand holding the phone, because I feel like there's more leverage that way. If I just have the phone setting down on a flat surface or something, I prefer to have that in that hand, because again, it gives me the impression of leverage, and I can kind of even turn the phone while I'm turning my hand. And again, maybe that's just mental. And the last thing, again, to reiterate about the rotor, was that we said that even when the rotor goes away, whatever you've chosen in the rotor, you then work with it with a 1-finger swipe up or down. So technically, the rotor's always on something, even when it's not showing up on the screen. So let's explain this. What kinds of things are in the rotor, and what do you do? What kinds of things can you do with it? Some of the things we learned when we were first introduced to the rotor were reading our text on the screen, because you can set the rotor to read by character, by words, and sometimes that's it. Other times you can even read by lines or by pages. But what happens is, let's say and you can even do this on the home screen. Let's say that I, hear an app icon on the home screen, and I say, well, how do you spell that? Or what is that word? I didn't understand it. Well, you can turn the rotor to either characters or words, and then you can swipe up and down with 1 finger to read by characters or words. Once you've turned the rotor to the characters item, for example, if you swipe down with 1 finger repeatedly, you will read character by character, whatever is selected. And if you swipe up with 1 finger repeatedly, you will read character by character backwards. And it'll even give you, by default, unless you disable this, it'll even give you a phonetic. When you pause on a character, you get to H, it'll say hotel or whatever also, to really drive that home. And again, every time you swipe down, it's reading 1 character to, the next character and the next character and the next character. And it's reading the character that you're passing over, going across, but we're going to save that for text editing. So those are a couple of things that are in the rotor. Some other things that you can put in the rotor, and they may not appear all the time, because they're still going to appear when they're needed, but you can add them to the rotor so that when they're needed, then they're available. These would be things like headings, links, buttons, visited links, form controls, tables, static text, images. I mean, there are just tons and tons of options of what you can add to the rotor. And some of it is,
I'm sorry, speaking rate?
Yeah, right. That's the next category then. So this is all like, websites and documents and, apps and stuff. Then you can add voiceover settings like speaking rate, and you can add speak hints, swipe up to turn it off, swipe down to turn it on, or, whatever, keep swiping in one direction to go back and forth, on, off, on, whatever. You can add typing mode, which we haven't even learned about yet, but we will next week. And that's, you can add volume, voiceover volume to the rotor. So tons and tons of voiceover settings can be added. Yep. Voiceover volume. You have your ringer volume. You have Siri volume. They're all kind of separate things. What you're putting in the rotor, if you put volume in the rotor, is the voiceover volume. So that's another area of things that can be added. Text selection. We're going to learn about that later, and you can add that to the rotor. Now, some of the things that appear automatically when they're needed in the rotor, but that you don't actually have control over adding, these are things like misspelled words. There's an option in the rotor called edit. And edit is going to give you a whole bunch of options, for working with text and images and other things as you get into more advanced apps. Here's another one. And this surprises some people. They don't realize they're using the rotor when they do this. We used a one finger flick up and down today earlier in class, didn't we? We used it to adjust the value by choosing what page of the home screen we were on, page 1, page 2, page 3. There is actually a rotor item called adjust value. It's just that most people don't know it because, again, it's contextual and it's dynamic. So when you land on a value adjuster, like the page selector, or like maybe a scrub bar in a music track that you're listening to, or in a video that you're watching, or you land on some other kind of a picker, maybe one of those things on a website where you have to select your state, and you've landed on it. It's in a form and it says Alabama, and now you have to swipe down Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California. You go through all the states. That's value. That's adjust value. That's a rotor option. And so if I'm if I'm on the picker, I happen to be on the picker and I'm swiping down through the states and I hear Connecticut, and I say, oh, how do you spell Connecticut? Well, I can actually turn the rotor away from adjust value, turn it to characters so I can read how you spell Connecticut. And then I just have to remember to turn the rotor back to adjust value, or typically if I swipe left and right to get off of that element and back onto it, typically as soon as I land on a value adjuster, the rotor is automatically going to default to adjust value. And that's what happens on the home screen. As soon as you run into that page selector or tap on it, the rotor automatically, without you ever knowing it, turns to adjust value, so that when you swipe up and down, you actually can adjust the value. That is, you are still using the rotor. You just don't realize it. And there's another one that's very common in the rotor called actions. And actions also will just show up, and you'll just be on it by default when you land on something that has actions. Now, earlier today, we talked about contextual menus with the long press. Many items on screen can have at least a good portion of those contextual items accessible from the actions rotor item. And again, they'll automatically default to it. And sometimes they'll be a little different than what's in the context menu. Sometimes they'll be the same. It depends on kind of what the visual means of doing those things is, whether you need the rotor or not. But if there is an actions item, then you'll default to it. And even more granular than just the app, sometimes even to a specific element, because I'm going to see different things in the rotor if I happen to be in an edit field than I would if I'm on a button or something, so you have to explore. The rotor is so vital to a voiceover user. It really is essential to doing what you need to do and being on the same playing field as our sighted peers. Because what happens is the stuff in the rotor, a lot of times there's a visual gesture that a person can do those same things, but we need a way to do them that makes sense. That's a structured way to do them with VoiceOver. So that's the rotor. And we are in overtime here. I do apologize for that, but I wanted to get that finished and teach that to you. The actions in the rotor, actually the home screen has actions, like all the apps. If you swipe up or down, you're going to hear things like edit and activate. Those are actions. So if you turn your rotor left and right, you'll hear actions as well. For those who are a little more experienced with this, if you get a notification on your screen as a banner while you're working, you first have to bring focus to that notification by touching it. Once it's there, you can double tap and hold to get the action, the context menu.
There's one here, the rotor is dynamic. Why do you have to add things to it? Because you have these options. There's like 40 things you can add to the rotor.
Right. There are some things that are just personal preference that are not dynamic that you may or may not want. Like, for example, I don't have speaking rate in my rotor because I don't find it necessary to change the speaking rate. I like what the rate is, and I leave it the same for all things. But some people may like it, faster when they're navigating and slower when they're reading a book or something. So they want that in there, or again, a lot of these web elements, like I have headings, links, and form controls, but I don't have like visited links, static text. Hope you all have a great weekend. God bless you. Remember, we have a help session on Tuesday of next week as well. So we will see all of you back here on Monday. Take care, everyone.